It's going to be a challenging day for moderators, especially today, because today is called Ask a Stupid Question Day. There's actually such a day called Ask a Stupid Question Day. I'm surprised, but hopefully the questions will be good from myself, and we already have 6 questions on the floor already for the panelists this morning. What I'm going to do is to let each of the panelists speak a little bit about their own organization, their own perception on risk, and then we will continue to address the questions put up by the floor. And after that, we will conclude with a parting advice from each of the panelists. We got Catherine, who will talk a little bit about sustainability and also the unique features of CFS as a coordinator for fundraising. We talked to Kheng from Care Corner, talking about the challenges and risks in providing multidisciplinary services. How do you manage risk across so many types of services? Fook will talk about funding and also disclosure, not just risk, but Fook brought a very good point. You don't disclose much about yourself, your purpose, your mission, what you do, what makes you tick, then how can we know you better beyond what you disclose in risk? And finally, Sovann, you're going to talk a little bit about the differences between directors' expectations in for-profit organizations and non-profit organizations. Are they really that different? So with that, maybe we can start with Catherine to talk about CFS and her views on sustainability when it comes to risks for charities. Catherine?
Hi, thank you, Uantchern. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you very much for having me. Just a little bit about the Community Foundation of Singapore. So CFS, we were started in the 2008, and we are also a charity with IPC status. And our vision is really to inspire philanthropy to build a thriving community in Singapore. And how do we do that? We do that mainly by helping donors set up what we call donor advice funds, which are really their own named charitable funds to support their favorite causes. And to date, we have about 170 of these funds, and we have raised over close to 200 million from these donors, and the bulk of it has been given out as grantees as grants to local organizations. So why do the donors come to us, right? Simply because this is a more cost-effective alternative than setting up their own family foundation or their own corporate foundation. So we provide the administrative support, just like what a family foundation could provide. We provide the philanthropy advisory. Many donors, have a passion, but they do not really know how to realize their passion. They have a vague idea. I want to support children. I want to help the elderly, but how to do it, right? And the advisory goes beyond just identifying a charity or a program. And donors really, nowadays look for a portfolio of social investments, so to speak. And they are looking to measure social impact that they have made over the years. And last but not least, we provide grant making support. We work with the charities to get the proposals, and if they fit with the causes that our donors are interested in, then we could recommend and show these proposals to our donors. And then once these projects are being funded, we track and we report the performance back to the donors. And we also help to handle multi-year tranches of grants, and also non-cash assets, converting it to cash and passing it out to our grantees. Other than that, we have other types of funds like community impact funds, and we also run collective impact initiatives. And when Chairman Gerard spoke about whether we will be around over the next 50 years, what struck me was really about funding sustainability, right? And when we talk about risk disclosures and trying to do all the things that we want to do, in the area of governance, it is really to make sure that we build ourselves up as an organization that is worthy of the trust of our donors and our various stakeholders, and we get the confidence, of those people who will come and support us. And I suppose when we think about who, right, are going to support us in the future. And, if we think about longer term, what's going to happen in the next 50 years, funding sustainability is an issue that, I just like to bring up, because Singapore is a rapidly aging society. We all know that, right? So the ratio of working adults, from 20 to 64 years old versus those that are over 65 was 13.5 in 1970. And today we are around 4. And what's going to happen in 2030? That number is going to drop to around 2.7. And the pandemic is regressive. We see a widening income gap. And I'm sure those of you working with your, the stakeholders will know that there are many families out there who have seen, hardly any savings over the past couple of years, or, having to dip into their savings, right, because of the pandemic. And if we look at our future donors, the millennials, they come into the workforce with a higher debt. They have a more unstable income, and they have a lower expected investment returns, right, because of the low interest rates right now. So, they do need to save a big proportion of their paychecks. And if the baby boomers are retiring and we have a shrinking workforce, then who is going to donate to us? And we talked a lot about digital donations, online platforms. That is true, pros and cons though. With online platforms, our local donors can also donate overseas. And, relatively speaking, Singapore, we come across as a very wealthy society. Many people will say, where got poor people in Singapore, right? We can't see, it is not obvious.
But, Catherine, if I can interject,
Yeah.
How do you measure sustainability risk? I mean, fundraising, and Fook Kwang, you can chime in after Catherine, then we'll go over to Kheng, and after that, Sovann. Sustainability, fundraising, one of the measures is how much reserves you have in the bank.
Yes.
4 times, 5 times, 1 times. But in your view, how do you measure sustainability? And then we can hear from Fook Kwang.
Yep. Yeah, so let me quickly finish, right? So I think at the end of the day, while we are looking at all these numbers, sustainability is, we look at the reserves, and we also look at, the fundraising and the sources of the income that a charity will get. And I think the one thing that I would want to say is that while the charities are focused on the here and the now, there is a need to actually take a look at the longer term. And as we are talking about risk, the organization, the board, and the management needs to think about risk. This is really what we are looking at, right? While we look at the indicators, how are we looking at, the future? And, I'd just like to end off by saying that legacy funding is actually a new source of, potential income, trying to get, legacy gifts. So how can we do that? This is something that, we would very much like to, talk about, later on if there is time.
That's a very good idea, Catherine, legacy funding, and I'm sure Fook Kwang can chime in on that. Sustainability is a big challenge. It's in the vernacular of most of us, but it's very difficult to grasp sustainability. So maybe over to Fook Kwang, talk about funding, the challenges, and talk about how do organizations talk about themselves, so that the more we know about them, the better we understand their risk profile. Fook Kwang?
Yeah, thanks very much, Uantchern. No, I suppose for most charities, fundraising is an existential issue, right? Because if you can't raise enough funds, you can't do all the things that you want to do. And as Catherine has mentioned, it's reserves and so on. But I really want to talk about this whole business of disclosure, which was a large part of the presentation. And although we have come a long way, I think, with the code of governance, with the transparency framework, with the awards and so on, as E-Sah's presentation has shown, there is still a large gap between what people say ought to be disclosed and what they actually disclose. So the question we really have to ask is why. I'm sure there are many reasons, but I think one reason maybe is because we sometimes tend to overcomplicate this concept of disclosure, of accountability and of transparency, and really use too many jargons and technical terms and abstract terms to describe it, compliance and audit reports and conflict of interest. These terms are not easy to grasp, and for charities, especially small charities, they may seem very far removed from what they're actually doing, especially on a day-to-day basis. So how do we simplify this concept and make charities understand what is it that you really want to do over and beyond, ticking the boxes in some of these checklists and so on.
Can I interject? One of the disclosure platform is the annual report.
Yeah.
And there's some questions from the floor on the annual report.
Yeah.
Do donors, beneficiaries, do they really read the annual reports?
Yeah.
Or the format given by COC is a template, and because it's a template, people tend to tick the box.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, whatever the disclosure checklist and all that, really, I think ultimately you really want to tell the story of your charity, right? What is it?
And how do you do that? How do you tell the story?
Yeah. So as I say, I think you ought to simplify it and get back to this basic point. And really, if you think about it, charities should be dying to tell their stories, right? Because after all, many of them are started by people who are really passionate about a cause, want to do these things and have big hearts, and they really ought to really want. So I don't have all the answers, but we really ought to develop a culture where charities are not just willing, but most happy to tell their stories about how they raise their funds, who are the people they want to help, and so on. So it's about a mindset, I think. And maybe one example I can give about this mindset, in case I get too abstract myself, is in the presentation, we talk about risk disclosure, right? That you should disclose your risk. And I suppose many charities may be reluctant to do it, but think about in this way. Disclosing your risk is actually talking about your weaknesses and vulnerability. Don't tell the story that everything is perfect. I'm 100% doing my work. Actually, I have lots of weaknesses. I struggle every day with these things, whether it's technology or PDP. I really do struggle. I have all these problems. Find a way of telling this as well to your donors and your other stakeholders about your vulnerability, so that they understand the full story. Your story is not just about all the wonderful things you have done,
not just the
millions that you have raised, but your struggles as well. So I suppose I'm wearing my journalistic hat on this more than my hat as a member of the Charity Council. Try to tell the complete story of your charity.
That's a good takeaway for Kwang. So to answer some of the questions from the floor, try to tell the complete story. In the UK, their Code of Corporate Governance actually requires the board to tell their story through disclosing their purpose, their mission, their vision, and it's mandatory to disclose their culture. So this is something maybe we can take a lead from that. And so thanks Fook for that. Over to you, Kheng. You run Care Corner, CEO there. It's multidisciplinary. If I can say, it's all over the place. So how do you run after all these little things called risks and manage them?
Yeah, thank you, Uantchern, and good morning to all of you. I'm glad to be able to join you for this forum. Maybe just a brief introduction of Care Corner. We was founded in 1981 during a period of significant economic and social changes. And this year we are celebrating our 40th anniversary, and we are faced with equally daunting challenges. As an organization, we are really woven into the community. We work with our community partners, donors, and volunteers to uplift the lives of the marginalized through a holistic continuum of care across life stages, as well as major transitions for both children, youth, individual families, as well as seniors. So to date, we serve more than 21,000 service users through 41 service points across the country. You know, as I was listening to what has been shared by E-Sah as well as Catherine and Fook Kwang, basically, I think we see ourselves as accountable stewards, not unaccountable owners. And the stewardship would cover the need for us to be responsible not only over resources, but over our mission, as well as our relationship and the opportunities that are given to us.
How do you define stewardship, Kheng?
Well, I would link it to internally, firstly, having a high level of accountability, and then willing to be transparent. Firstly, driving the change actually from within the organization, because without the change embedded with the organization, then disclosure is just, you know, the tail end of what is needed. Yeah. So I think for us, really at this point in time, at a very basic level, because of our multi-services nature, as well as our distributed channel, having a systematic, comprehensive risk framework is very important. So we started on this journey in 2016, and we find that actually building the right culture and the capability and capacity to do the work is actually very important, because without that, you can't sustain the change, or it's just, as you say, you know, ticking the box, you know, but there is no real transformation within the organization.
If I can say this, the word culture has been mentioned twice already. Fook mentioned culture. You mentioned culture. So it seems like culture is going to be a very hot topic. And after Sovann, when we get to Catherine, so Catherine, maybe we'll hear from you about culture. After Sovann, when he talks about board issues. Sorry, I'll go back to you, Kheng. You were talking about culture.
Yeah, and I just wanted to actually highlight that at the operational level for us, my major concerns today are really safety risks. Safety risks over our people, and that would be our staff, our clients, our volunteers. Safety of our premise, especially with all the requirements for safe distance and with limited space to conduct our services, and safety over privacy of data. And really a lot of these risks have to be built into the practice itself. You know, it's not a function of just disclosure. It has to be inbuilt into the practice of our delivery of services.
It should not be just in the manual or SOP.
So I'm just saying that the change is deeper than really the disclosure.
And also, Kheng, you were talking about not just physical risk, not just physical safety risk, but mental safety risk.
Yes. Because you see, I think my major concern is really incident that result in injury as well as loss of life. Because fundamentally, that is what we should be caring for our client, for our staff, for our volunteers. And especially when we are doing work with mental health issues, with family violence, you know, we are confronted with a very different set of challenges, and we have social workers or counselors doing home visit alone. You know, there are a lot of other considerations that I think many charities are faced with on the ground. And I think we need to kind of get going in that aspect as well.
Okay, one final question for you, Kheng, before we go over to Sovann. Is mental health risk in your top 10 risks?
I think it is in relation to our ability to sustain the delivery of our services. You know, I always tell my staff, I don't want my staff to end up to be my client. You know? and therefore, the need to take care of our client, our staff, so that we can go for the long haul for our client. And I think it is a very important aspect of ensuring enough capacity so that they can actually have a balanced workload to do what they need to do actually, and do it effectively without being a casualty.
Thank you. So we talk about PDP risk, cyber risk, operational risk, but a lot of people forget that mental health risk is front and center, especially now. So something to learn, dear participants, is mental health risk your top 10 risks, at least in the foreseeable future. So over to you, Sovann, and then we go over to Catherine to talk about culture and what's the difference between stewardship and sustainability. There's quite a few questions on stewardship. Should we get rid of the founders? There's one very good question. Founders, should they go? Should they stay? So maybe over Sovann to you, there's quite a lot of questions on investments and keeping secure the money that we have all from the donors. And it seems like there's some views that the charity boards are a bit more kiasu, that they're not willing to invest, not willing to take that risk. So maybe I hear from you, Sovann, investment risk.
Well, I'm not an expert in investments, but let me start by using this opportunity to applaud people who sit on board and committees of charities. They are doing a great job. You know, in my career profession of assisting not-for-profit organizations in their risk process and internal audit process, I have the opportunity to compare charity board with, let's say, listed company boards. And I actually feel, you know, as I mentioned in our conversations, that I actually feel that charities, at least in the Singapore context, we even have a more robust governance structure than listed boards. Now, let me explain why. In a typical listed board in a company in the Singapore context, most of our listed companies are small to medium caps, and typically they would have 5 directors, right? 2 executive directors and 3 independent directors. Mm-hmm. And the risks are usually assessed by the management team, and they go through the table for the audit committee. Once it's done with the audit committee, it's as good as the whole board accepts it, right? Because the management is the executive director, and the other independent directors are the audit committees. So it's one level of clearance. But in the charity context, if you look at a typical IPC, let's say you have 10 board members, right? And most of them, I think, except maybe for very few, most of the IPCs have come across, all the board members are independent. And let's say if they have 5 subcommittees, and each subcommittee chaired by a board member and 2 co-op outsiders, you end up with 20 independent minds, independent people. So in fact, if you look at it, the governance structure for charities are even more robust. And in fact, as I said earlier, the toughest questions I have in my career of doing risk management for charity, in my risk management for charities and listed companies, are actually from charity boards. Charities. Because they are so involved, they are so passionate about the operations, they know the ins and outs, they can challenge you. And I really appreciate that. Yeah, that will be my comments. Yeah.
But maybe, Sovann, thanks for that. Can I ask you a follow-on question relating to stewardship and the profile of charity boards? So we hear you, and I totally agree with you that charities boards are very hands-on. They understand risk better because they are hands-on. But do you think that gives them a short-term view of risk, so that because they want to make sure that nothing goes wrong, and that does not jive in with the long-term goal of stewardship? So how do you balance that risk management mindset and the stewardship mindset? Because we got a good question from Yuki. Thanks, Yuki, about the role of board in terms of stewarding, making sure that's sustainable, but at the same time, how do you balance that with day-to-day operational risk management?
I would say for charity board, like I mentioned earlier, because of the diversity, even the various subcommittees and so many independent minds around, I think from my experience anyway, risk assessment for charities are quite comprehensive, both short-term, operational, as well as very strategic.
And do you think that boards, one more question for you, Sovann, before we go to Catherine to talk about culture, do you believe that charities board have stewardship in their mind as a risk management factor?
Definitely more so than listed company board, actually, I would say.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sovann. Back to you, Catherine. Culture, is that linked to sustainability?
Well, definitely. I think when we look about culture of the people, Kheng has already mentioned, right, that we have to inculcate in our staff to, embrace this idea of reviewing risk in everything that we do in all our daily activities. But this is also not to the extent that, because they become so scared that they don't dare to do anything new. So therefore, we also have to build a culture of being accepting of making mistakes, right? And of course, we also have to have a culture and also have a platform and framework to be able to mitigate any of the risk. So it doesn't mean that, understanding the risk means that we don't do anything to, to ensure that no risk, nothing will happen. If nothing will happen, then, we cannot do anything as well. So how do we take an appropriate amount of risk, right? And this is also back to Yuki's question of like investments, right? So most of the time, the board and even the management ourselves, we feel that, oh, there is no upside in investing more aggressively, because if we lose money, the donors will complain, or the donors will desert us. But is that really the truth, right? I think right now many of the charities are run by very professional staff, so we do have a professional staff in the organization, and we are able to attract professional financial experts into the onto our board. Then yeah, with the correct expertise, the level of risk that a charity can take can also go up. And I think Sovann talked about strategic risk versus the operational risk. Yes, I think it is also necessary for both the board and the management to think about longer term. And I mean, when we talk about sustainability in funding, yes, today, here and now is okay, donations are going to go down because of COVID-19. But what are we going to do, this year and next in order to, well, catch the next up wave, right? So are we going to find new donors? Are we going to have new sources of donations? Are we going to look overseas? I think these are all things that we need to think about. I guess it is not just about mitigating risk, but also to anticipate, right, what else can be coming and what else, that the charity or our sector could face in the future.
And how do you disclose culture? If you were to disclose, there's quite a fair bit of questions on disclosure on the floor. And after Catherine will go over to Kwang and we'll ask Kwang whether there's a silver bullet on disclosure. To talk about annual reports, there's some questions on the website. But Catherine, one more question for you: how do we disclose whether a charity has the right culture? Is there such thing as a right culture?
Well, I think what Kwang says is very true. How do you tell your story, right? And and I think the activities that you do, the things that you write on your social media, all this will show the personality of the organization, the culture of the people, and all of us, right? Every one of the staff that works in our organization, and also all our board members and all the volunteers are still ambassadors of the organization. So therefore, being able to engage and being able to ask them to help us to share the story, I think that is very important. I mean, back to this legacy, right? If you want to have a legacy, gifts, at the end of the day, you want a top of mind recall that is favorable. So at that point in time, when an individual is thinking about writing a will, they think about, yes, I want to, nominate this particular charity, right? So it is really about reminding people about the things that we do and why we do it well and how we have done it well, rather than the annual report. Right? I'm pretty sure when someone is planning which charity to donate to, they don't take out the annual report to flip through.
But they should, Catherine. They should.
They would have done their homework, but at that point in time when they make that decision, I would say it is very much an emotional decision still. So therefore, it is all part of the, the homework that we need to do to have all the publications, all the results, all the financial data available. But at that point in time, when the person makes a donation, what is the motivation? What is the mindset? And I guess, it has to come across, in everything that we do to, encourage top of mind recall.
Maybe just to add in what Catherine has just mentioned, I suppose the sources of funding comes in various forms. And therefore, I think the extent of disclosure would have to match in relation to who are we talking to, correct? Because there could be a corporate donors that we are actually fully engaged in disclosing the program outcome, and we review that on a quarterly basis. So to some extent, I think how much to who, how often has to also be, in a sense, tailored according to your sources of fund and your stakeholders' investment in the organization as well. I know that there's the general requirements, but I think we need to tailor it so that it becomes more useful, as well as I think the efficacy is there. If not, the cost of compliance of trying to disclose everything to everyone, I'm not too sure how useful or practical that is.
Thanks, Fook, for that. We'll go over to Fook Kwang, then we'll come back to Poking. I'm quite keen to get Poking to talk more about stewardship, because how do you define stewardship once again? And founders are seen as stewards, but are founders the impediment to the progress of the organization? So there's some question about, do we let founders go because they stayed for too long? They overstay their welcome. So what is stewardship? And let's Poking to think about that before we come back to him. But now over to you, Fook Kwang. There's a question from Jerome. It's not a stupid question, Jerome. It's about disclosure. How do we ensure that people have the right amount of disclosure? Should COC take that role? So when charities submit all their annual reports to COC, there's thousands of them. Who checks them to make sure that they're okay?
Yeah, okay. No, I agree with Catherine about the annual reports. I wonder who reads them sometimes. Maybe I shouldn't say it because I'm from the council, and you should do your annual report properly and meet all the requirements. But when you're working in a charity, really you want to touch hearts, right? You want to make an emotional connection with your stakeholders, whether it's your donors or your beneficiaries. And how do you make an emotional connection with an annual report? I'm not sure. You should make, as I say, you should make all the disclosure. But when you want to tell your story, maybe you should put your annual report aside and just ask yourself, what is it that really did move you to start this charity? What is the thing that most excites you about this charity? And start telling your story from there. Are there ways of doing this? I think in this new digital world, there are hundreds of ways of doing it, right? I was involved in a project about telling stories of the pandemic. And through the project, I found out that there were many sites in Singapore that are started specifically to tell stories. Some of them stories of the pandemic, but others telling stories about social workers and so on. I can name a handful here. There's one called What Are You Doing Singapore, WAYD. There's one called Our Better World. And there are people who are good at storytelling, and they want to build, this sense of community in Singapore and so on. And of course, in the digital world, there's so many other ways of telling your stories through videos, through illustrations and so on.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Fook Kwang, but do you think that using the website as a option, so instead of just mandating the annual report to be in that Word template format, would the COC think about using the website to disclose what charities do, telling their stories?
I think the problem with having a sort of a one-size-fits-all system, which sometimes you need to have, is that you then end up with this sort of template system. But I understand the need for that, because you need to be able to make some comparisons. You know, you need to have some benchmarks for disclosures and so on. So I wouldn't say that, you know, we do away with the annual report or some of these disclosure requirements, but charities should go much more beyond those standard requirements. There's one other point I want to make about risk, which was alluded, and that is to say that you know, risks are interrelated. You know, we mentioned funding risk, right, which is a big thing. Yep. But we need also to watch that because it is such a big risk, and charities are so concerned about it. You know, you want to get as much funds as possible. It is possible that you then introduce other risks, you know, concerning governance and ethics. And of course, you know, I think we all remember the big case with the NKF, which was very successful in raising funds, but of course it had problems with governance and ethics. And culture, exactly, with culture, with the board. So risks are interrelated, you know, so be very careful about it, that in wanting to minimize one big risk, you may introduce many other risks.
So one last question for you, Fook, before we go over to Kheng to talk about stewardship. Should we let founders go? There was one question from Aloysius. Are they staying for too long? Are they overstaying their welcome? So Fook,
I'm sure that, I mean, you don't have, I can't give you one, and I'm sure there are some founders who continue to do terrific work and so on. But I agree with the general approach that there ought to be term limits. And it is I think it is dangerous to have people who stay too long. And that, you know, you need to comply with board renewal requirements and so on.
So whether you're the founder or not.
Yeah.
So one more question from you, Fook. What takeaway do you want to give to the participants today in terms of disclosure? So is storytelling the answer to disclosure?
For me, I would say so, yes. And I would like participants to think of disclosure way beyond the technical, you know, strict requirements that we have. Think of disclosure as nothing more than telling the story of your charity.
Your passion,
what united you to start. Yeah, exactly. Why did you start? And keep on doing that, because your story will change. There are different challenges. You get new people into your organization, so it's a never-ending story. And there are lots of people who have still not heard about your story. So think about it in those terms, rather than in the terms that the experts typically talk about.
Thanks, Fook. That's really great. Let's get to Kheng to talk about stewardship. There's a question from Aloysius. How do we balance stewardship and letting go founders who stay for too long, overstay their welcome? Then we'll go back to Sovann to talk. There's still quite a lot of questions on directors. Directors are short-term, they are kiasu, they are risk-averse, they make short-term decisions, they don't want to go beyond the unknown, they rather do no wrong than do right. No, there's this perception that charity directors are not there yet. So maybe Sovann think about that. We'll go back to Kheng. Kheng, stewardship, do we let founders go? I mean, what's your view?
I think hopefully the notion of stewardship lives beyond the founders, and I think really term limit is really the way to go, because you just need the renewal. But I think the whole idea of ensuring stewardship, from whether is it at the board level, it is also at the management level. So how do we transit board as well as transit senior management staff from one generation to another? And I think the whole notion of succession planning ahead of time become very key. For all of us as charity, in a sense, we are driven by our purpose. So the only way to kind of continually build the culture is to identify, I think, and most organizations have some of your core values, and then you just need to kind of repeatedly work on those values, translate that into policy, into practices, into attitude and behaviors. For us, for example, we do regular engagement survey of our employee, and we ask them questions in terms of these are our values, and they give us an assessment of how well are we living up to those values. And because we make the values known, management can be challenged if we don't live up according to those values. And of course, through testimonials from our client, we get to have a sense of how are we delivering our service beyond just what we do, how are we going about doing it.
Do you find that the charities spend too much time disclosing risks, spend too much time disclosing discrete items like events, but find little time to disclose things like what you talk about values and purpose?
I think it varies for different charity. In the past, actually, there is a lot of storytelling in terms of the work itself, but I think the balance of disclosing the purpose and the work, as well as the process in terms of some of the things that we are doing, I think needs to go hand to hand, hand in hand.
So it's that balance.
Yeah, it's a balance and a bit of focus as well. And I hope that actually in some way, because we find actually running through an entire risk review really help you to understand your operation. In fact, I'm very tempted to say that if you want to understand, for a new manager that joined me, if you want to understand, or a board that joined me, I say, look at the risk register. You kind of really have a good sense of what the organization is all about. I'm talking about the internal risk register document. It's really a very good educational tool and an induction program actually for managers as well as for board.
Thanks, Fook, for that. Over to you, Sovann. Strategic risk, board risk. It seems to be quite a few questions on that. What's your view? How do we manage? How do we address board risk, strategic risk? And then we go over to Catherine to talk about your favorite topic, sustainability. How do we roll this out to the sector? It's really important. I totally concur with you, Catherine. But how do we imbue a sustainability mindset? Should we set up a task force or a focus group? What should we do to imbue sustainability throughout the charity sector? And maybe Fook can chime in on that. But back to you, Sovann. Strategic risk, board risk, how do we deal with it? I mean, do management go up to the board and say you're wrong?
Well, I think the dynamic between board and management is always the trickiest part in not-for-profit organization, right? But yeah, I'm surprised at the question of board being short terms and hold back progress and all that. I think if you've got a situation like that, I think it's time to look at board composition maybe, or maybe looking at whether or not, in fact, you have the right chairman in place. But for charities I've been involved with anyway, small or big, I find that they have a very good structure of dealing with long-term strategic issues, whether at the board level or even some have a committee that actually had undertake specific strategic reviews. And in fact, many of them conduct annual strategic retreats and all that. So I in my view anyway, I think as far as the charities that I've been involved in, I think I don't see any issue being board being an obstacle to long-term staying relevant. I think one of the key issue of charity is to make sure that in the long term you stay relevant. I think that's always has to be reviewed every year. Now I'll go back to the question on investments. I think there are two kinds of perspective. If you have a endowment fund, like what Catherine has got in CFS, where or some other charity where your program is depending on the income you get from your endowment, then obviously you need to focus on the return, right? Whether you do it in-house or you outsource to a professional firm to try to looking at certain risk profile, how you want to manage the investment to make sure that you earn enough return to fund your programs. I think that is one kind of perspective. But if your investment is to building up of reserve, whether it's 1 year, 2 year kind of reserve for your operations, then I don't think you should be too focused on investment return. Because like Fook is saying, you're too focused on that, you bring in another types of risk. You may subject your investment to unnecessary risk that you have to worry about. So I would say that, if your reserve, you just build up to make sure there is enough fund there for your programs, then I think just focus on your operations, focus on your other issues.
Talking about audit, so auditing the investment policy would be good. What do you think, Sovann, about auditing the board?
Well, I think CMPL has got a very good structure there, services there to assist charity boards in addition to maybe certain self-evaluation checklists and all that. But I think if you want a third party to come in to sort of audit the board or looking at your board performance, I think it'd be good to actually get in touch with CMPL.
Because I sit on board. It would be great if someone audits me. Because sometimes when you're there, you don't know what's right or what's wrong. Okay, thanks, Sovann. Back to you, Catherine. Sustainability, such a hot topic now in the private sector, and in the charity sector, I'm sure it's just as hot. How do we permeate this to the sector? How do we promote sustainability as a mindset?
I suppose in this case, you are talking about sustainability across everything, right? It's not just about funding. So, we are really looking at the ESG and,
the SDGs,
the SDG goals,
so
right?
Talk about that, yes.
Yes. So I think I think as a good, who can say good stewards, of our organization, and after all of us in this sector is doing this for the greater good of society, then yes, embracing ESG, environmental, social, governance, looking at all these factors and incorporating this in our day-to-day activities, I guess should be a given. For example, even for the E part, the environment part, although we are almost like a social sector service sector organization, very small, we don't pollute the earth a lot, but we also can do our part, to say follow the SG Green Plan initiatives, right? That is some of the things that we could do. On the social part, I'm sure a lot of us are already, very focused on that. And I think one area about, the S for the ESG is taking care of our employees. So Kheng talked about, mental wellness,
mental health,
making sure that they are not burnt out. Are there other things, gender equality, pay equality, giving them the flexi hours to allow them to have a good work-life balance? Are we, welcoming of persons with certain disabilities or challenges? Do we welcome them? Are we inclusive? And that's not just for the employees or management, but across the board as well, right? So I think that is the S part, and of course, this whole governance part. I would say that the UN SDG goals obviously is becoming very a hot topic, and for a lot of companies, looking to do CSR activities, and the companies that are even working with us, to deploy their philanthropic funds, they would also want to align, right, with charities that are aligned to their causes or to their purpose. So my first speaker, Mr. Xiaoqun Xiong, talk about partnering up with companies that are aligned. So yes, it is good, to be able to align our work to, some of these UN SDG goals. But although I would caution, that we also be careful, because after a while, if we cannot, if we cannot report the numbers, we say that, oh, I'm all for gender equality, or I'm all for solving poverty, but at the end of the day, I cannot come up with any data or numbers to justify, or evidence to justify this. Over time, then you will lose the confidence, of your donors or your other stakeholders. So if you say that you're going to do it, then you really have got to commit. And I would say that the ESG is not something that a staff or a team can do alone. It really requires, the entire board, management, the whole organization to focus. Yeah.
Thanks,
Uantchern, can I chip in a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead, Sovann.
Yeah, I think in terms of sustainability, what Catherine mentioned about the whole spectrum of ESG, meaning economic, environment, social, and governance. As you have seen in E-Sah's example of Sovann Methodist Children's Home, actually most of the charity who are in social service space or in art space or whatever, they are contributing a lot to the economic as well as the social part of the ESG, right? Creating employment, getting people retrained, looking after the people's mental and physical well-being, staffs and volunteers, and also in terms of quality services, right? This is your responsibility to your customers and all that. So actually all those are there and quite well described in the existing annual report. Maybe just not structured in the so-called ESG format of a sustainability reporting based on GRI standards or whatever. The only thing which I don't find in, of course, in the annual report is on the environment side. It's only an environment side. So if you talk about how charity can address the sustainability in the whole spectrum of ESG, I would say just on the environment side. But unfortunately, most charity, there's not much you can do other than, changing LED lights, automatic switches here and there, because the premises is given to you, right? You don't have much of a choice, or you are rented or something. So there's not much you can do. But for charity who are lucky and have opportunity to actually build your own premises, yeah, like I can see some schools and all that, by all means, build your school or your premises to that what do you call the BCA's green mark, gold or even platinum, right? And keep it certified, because every few years when it's certified, the benchmark getting higher and higher, right? So that will be a testament to of your good ESG practice, and also BCA actually also collect information from buildings which submit the energy consumptions, and they actually group them into quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and the bottom quarter, right? So if you want to practice good energy consumption, then one of the target you would say that I built a gold mark building or platinum, and my consumption on a per square feet intensity on a per square meter basis will always be in tier 1 or tier 2. Okay, so charity, if you are lucky enough to build and own your own premises, you can actually move in that direction.
And of course, if I can chime in on that, Sovann, we also want to draw the line as to not to do too much. Otherwise, there will be another set of disclosure requirements, like Singapore Exchange require.
Exactly.
Thanks, Sovann. We're running out of time, participants and panelists. It's been a robust discussion. We've got about a couple of minutes left, and I think we have answered most of the questions. And for those that we have not answered, I'm sure the panelists, E-Sah, can go back to the participants with the answers to them. So maybe we can round up by each of the panelists giving us your Christmas wish. Christmas is only 13 weeks away. What's your Christmas wish for risk management, risk disclosure, sustainability, stewardship, board risk? What's your wish for charities for this Christmas? Maybe we start with Catherine, then we go over to Kwang, then Kheng, and finally Sovann, you can round us up for the day. So Catherine, what's your Christmas wish on risk disclosure?
I never thought, I've never linked Christmas with risk, but this is the first time. Well, I would say I wish my entire organization would actually view risk not as something, to be feared or it's a chore that, that has got to be managed, but really look at it as, something that we need to look at so that we can all fulfill our ultimate, goal and the vision of the organization. So, we look at the risk, but we do not want to let the risk, to hold us back to the point that we are not fulfilling our potential.
You don't want to be a deer with the headlights coming on with risk management. So risk is a means to an end rather than an end in itself. Don't scare yourself. It's like a lot of people look at risk management like a horror movie. It's like people scare themselves with risk management. Thanks, Catherine. Kwang, what's your Christmas wish for disclosure, for annual report, for our charity sector for this Christmas?
Yeah. No, so I wish all charities will be great storytellers, and tell me stories that move me, not just the wonderful things that they have done, but also how they also struggle with many problems and issues, so that when people understand, how difficult it is for them to do the work they do, more people will be moved to help and join them.
You're right. Thanks for that, Kwang. I've read a lot of charities annual reports, and I've not seen people saying how difficult it is to do what they do in the annual report. So look at annual reports beyond the disclosure and tell the story. Great Christmas wish, Kwang. Kheng, from you, stewardship, what's your Christmas wish?
I think for me, it really is for all of us to kind of stay true to our purpose and do our work well, because I may be naive or by faith, I think that funding will follow, if you're doing the right thing. And
that's really good advice. Funding will follow.
Yeah. And really the second thing is that the whole area of accountability, stewardship, is a long journey, ongoing process. So my wish is, get started, just get started in this journey. I think it's in the right direction. I think.
How about culture, Kheng? What's your wish for culture?
Invest in your leadership team, because I think it flows both at the board and the leadership team level.
Thank you, Kheng. And to round us up for this morning, afternoon already, all great questions today. No stupid questions from this morning. So we've survived ask a stupid question day. Sovann, what's your Christmas wish for us, for the charity sector, when it comes to risk management, risk disclosure, resources?
I'll mute myself first. Okay, I 2 points. Actually, I'd like to agree with the first point. I'd like to agree with Kheng and Catherine, because a lot of time people look at doing risk management exercise as a pain. They think is an unnecessary exercise, mostly because everything is sort of outsourced and they think of it as ticking the box. But if you do what Care Corner and what CFS has done, actually institutionalize it, it's in everybody's day-to-day responsibility, and they are able to update, understand and update their own risk register and dashboard. It's a walk in the park, and it's something that you can actually table and for your audit committee, your board every quarter. It's just simple as that. So once you get into your culture, this is something that we need to do. And this is how we manage. I think it will work very well. And my other aspect is in disclosure, I would like to agree with Fook. It's about telling story. And now if you look at it, the disclosures, if you look at disclosure of our compliance, I need to do this, I need
It's too much, I got no
then,
resources.
then you actually you're not focusing on the key thing. The key thing is what Fook said. How do you tell the story? What story do you want to focus on so that people understand you and therefore come back and donate money to you?
Like what Kwang said, the funding will come when the story is there.
Yes.
Thanks very much, Sovann, for the Christmas wish. So thank you, panelists and E-Sah for the wonderful presentation. If I can sum it up this morning in a few key words, risk management profiling framework is the foundation. That's just important. We hear from Catherine. We talk about sustainability, the next hot thing on the table, but don't go beyond taking the box. Don't think of it as a box ticking exercise for sustainability. Kwang talk about stewardship. Fook talk about storytelling. So the challenge is really, dear participants, how do we weave it all together so that you don't feel that it's more work, but really your calling and your purpose for your organization. And with that, I'd like to thank SIAS very much for organizing this event. And everybody, have a good afternoon, have a good lunch. Thank you.